Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining us today at HTCC. My name is Josh Meihaus, here representing Miracosta College, and very excited to share with you the research I've been conducting regarding the brony phenomenon. So, without further ado, let's get into this. I'm sure most of you are aware of a toy franchise. It's known as My Little Pony. It's been owned and operated by the company Hasbro since the 1980s. However, what we are referring to in this case is something known as My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, a modern reimagining of My Little Pony created by cartoonist Lauren Faust in 2010. Since it was created 6 years ago, this series has been praised for its positive feminist message, the sense of community it advocates, as well as its strong female characters. However, what makes this series so particularly fascinating is that it has developed around it a gigantic population of adolescent, teen, and young adult men who identify as earnest fans and genuinely enjoy watching and discussing the show. They refer to themselves collectively as bronies. Bronies are the topic of my research today. Now, in order for you to understand the purpose of this research, it's important that you're aware of three key assumptions that culture tends to hold about this group. If you are a brony in the United States, you are assumed to be a pedophile, a social or sexual deviant, and I'll allow Fox News to make my point for me here. Ooh, no sound. Whee!
Those computers didn't have sound.
All right, well then I will go ahead and explain Fox News, which is probably going to fry my brain. In this situation, a Fox News caster actually basically compared bronies, who were simply expressing an interest in an admittedly feminine show. He compared bronies to individuals who live off taxes, live off government benefits as babies. Of course, also a perfectly acceptable life choice. It's a matter of a comparison that is rather offensive and a caricature of what bronies truly are, simply regular human beings attempting to enjoy something that they genuinely enjoy. And if not social or sexual deviants or pedophiles, bronies are assumed in culture to be homosexual. Now, in addition to the fact that these are potentially damaging stereotypes, these thought processes, these assumptions are problematic in that these two are almost certainly untrue. We can recognize them as straight up stereotypes, bigoted stereotypes. And we know this one isn't true. There are studies that show that bronies are only slightly more likely to exhibit non-normative sexual tendencies than the general population. So my question for you, ladies and gentlemen, is, if these assumptions are so unlikely, why do they persist in culture, and what does that persistence say about our culture? This is the question I aim to answer with my research, and I answered using the following hypothesis. I suggested during the course of my research that interest in My Little Pony Friendship is Magic is more than an interest and is in fact an identity, carrying many of the same social consequences as identification with LGBTQIA+ culture. In order to evaluate, and for those of you unfamiliar with the acronym used on the screen there, LGBTQIA+ is a catch-all term referring to non-normative gender or sexual identities. It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, intersex, asexual, and more. In order to evaluate my hypothesis, I used the following survey design. I used what I call a dual survey design. I sampled bronies and LGBTQIA+ oriented individuals in order to determine if they had shared three experiences at the hands of culture: shame, retaliation, and thoughts of self-harm. In order to determine if there was a relationship between these two cultures in terms of what they had experienced, and if so, what that relationship said about their cultural interaction. Distributing the survey was a fairly simple process. I used social media in both cases. I distributed the LGBT emphatic survey twice on Reddit and once on the image board 4chan. For those of you familiar with that, I apologize for your familiarity with it. In the case of the brony survey, I distributed it once on the My Little Pony news website, Equestria Daily, once on a My Little Pony fan fiction platform, and once on a My Little Pony image board called PonyChan. Yeah. Starting off with some basic demographic results. For those of you with a packet, this is figure 1 in your packet. As you can see, amongst LGBT respondents, there was an incredibly diverse representation of sexualities. Figure 2 in your packet, brony sexuality, was not as diverse. As you can see, the overwhelming majority of bronies identify as either exclusively or predominantly heterosexual. The same pattern is visible in the gender statistics. Once again, this is figure 3 in your packet. Amongst LGBT respondents, gender was fairly equitous, with males and females represented, but the additional gender identities mixed in there as well. And once again, figure 4 in your packet, bronies were much less diverse. The overwhelming majority of bronies identified as male, with only a few females and other gender identities. In addition, in the case of both samples, respondents tended to be quite young and also to be Caucasian. And quickly before I move on from this section, I should note that in order to create something of a baseline against which to compare both the results of the Brony group and the LGBT group, I split the LGBT group into those individuals who identify as exclusively heterosexual and all other sexuality, since of course it's likely that heterosexual individuals have not had the experiences that we're evaluating here. And speaking of those experiences, here's where the research starts to get pretty interesting, as we examine the experience correlations. Starting off with the least surprising sociological finding in human history, the most saliently negative experiences were, of course, amongst the LGBT group. As you can see, more than half of LGBT respondents described having experienced shame as a result of their identity, and a significant minority reported both retaliation and thoughts of self-harm. Equally unsurprising is that almost no heterosexual individuals had had such experiences, but fascinatingly, bronies did. Immediately, in examining these statistics, we can see a correlation between these two groups surfacing. Bronies are much, much more likely than the heterosexual population to experience shame as a result of their identity than are heterosexuals for their sexual identity. Something similar can be said of these retaliation statistics. While currently in the center column there does not appear to be a clear standout amongst these demographics, if we dig into the data and examine only those experiences that were moderate or severe in nature amongst those who had experienced them, both bronies and LGBT individuals are much more likely to have experienced such forms of retaliation, in this case, hatred. Of course, as you can see in the third column, there was no correlation between self-harm and these identities in heterosexual or the brony realm, and this was to be expected. This was more of a reach hypothesis with regard to self-harm. So, immediately, based on raw demographics alone, we can see a visible relationship between these identities surfacing. And fascinatingly enough, this relationship only becomes more significant as we examine some of the interviews that I conducted during my research. I conducted a total of 5 interviews of bronies and 3 of LGBT respondents during the course of my research, and I provided 2 of the most interesting excerpts on the screen for you here. Once again, a cursory inspection causes a significant relationship between these 2 individuals to surface in terms of how they think about their communities, how they view their place in their communities, and how they view their attitude towards their communities. As you can see, the young woman on the left-hand side, Farida, describes having become really, really involved in the queer community of her university only upon discovering that a significant support structure existed there. Almost identically, Simon, the gentleman on the right-hand side, a brony from Norway, describes having decided to become really, really active in the brony community, also only after discovering the significant support structure. In addition, both respondents describe having immersed themselves in their respective cultures and gradually become deeper and deeper involved in that culture as time went on. So in other words, these cultures not only share demographic characteristics, but even more fascinatingly, share ideological processes with regards to how they conceptualize and act towards their communities. So there is a strong demographic relationship, there's a strong ideological relationship, and when all is said and done with regards to our hypothesis at question today, I think we can absolutely say that brony identity carries many of the same social stigmas as identification with LGBTQIA+ culture. The shame statistics demonstrate that to some degree, and as well as the assumptions that are typically held about bronies in culture demonstrate them as well. But that leaves us with an awkward question, because having answered this, we now know that bronies are attached with these same stigmas that are used against LGBTQIA+ individuals, but they are not, generally speaking, homosexual. So what exactly is the explanation for this pathologization, as it is often referred to in sociology? Well, in order to determine this question, we need to be aware of 3 key facts. First of all, bronies are no more likely to engage in fan cultures than the general population. By fan culture, I mean video game culture, anime culture, cartoon culture, etc. And so brony pathologization cannot be attributed to the fact that bronies are nerdy, necessarily. We also know that bronies are only slightly more likely to exhibit non-normative sexual tendencies than the general population. And so their pathologization cannot be attributed to basic homophobia either. And finally, we know that bronies are demonized and pathologized on a level that is unlike almost any other group in the United States. Very few groups are accused of being pedophiles simply for having an interest in a TV show. And so that leaves us with the question of what is the explanation? I found this explanation in what I have called the social pressure analysis. Effectively, I posit that the bronies have come to fill the role of something of a social pressure valve in the United States. What I mean by this is that increasingly in the US, it is inappropriate to express anti-LGBT or homophobic attitudes, but these attitudes are still rampant, particularly in areas such as the South. And in other words, these individuals holding homophobic attitudes must have an opportunity to express them. And so, bronies, being that they are innately feminine due to their interest, can be easily placed in the box of homosexuality, whether or not they are actually homosexual. They are subsequently pathologized and forced to experience these homophobic attitudes, giving such homophobic individuals the opportunity to expel that thinking without the fear of social sanction. If I were to continue with this research, this is absolutely the direction that I would take it with. And I think I do plan to continue with this research. Because beyond the lofty sociological implications of this issue, I need you folks to understand, if nothing else after you leave this room, that this presentation, as much as it is about bronies, is not about bronies. No, this presentation is about what bronies represent in this country. The fear of discrimination and the fear of being called a monster, a pedophile, a sexual deviant, any number of awful things simply because of what they are. Bronies are representative of the desire of every individual to express themselves freely without the fear of persecution. In other words, they are an archetype. Ladies and gentlemen, in many ways we live in an era of unprecedented tolerance, and also in an era where an 11-year-old boy attempting to end his own life over his interest in a girls' television series is a reality. It's time for a change, because the wanton hatred of non-normativity is something that presents a great danger to everyone in this country. And this research tells me, if nothing else, that not just bronies, not just for bronies, but for everyone who is different, that the battle is not over. And in many ways, I'm comforted by that fact. Because at the end of the day, I am thrilled for a banner to carry, for a people to fight for, and a cause to champion. And I think each and every one of us in this room can agree with that sentiment. So ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your time. I bid you a wonderful HTCC 2016. I'd love to thank my mentor, Dr. Tao Ha, and my honors director, Professor Christopher Sleeper, for everything they have done for my presentation. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.